Do you want to say hi to them now? Or is it
Yeah.
just me?
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning. It's not necessarily the morning.
Who knows when they're listening to this stuff?
Good 3 a.m. and you can't sleep and you have a test tomorrow, everybody.
Yeah, there we go.
I hope it's working out for you. Maybe you should have studied. All right. Welcome back to Historical Ramblings with Schnetti and Scherzer. And we have exciting news. We found out we have the upgraded version of the software we are using, and we can now talk longer. So that means we'll actually take breaths.
Yeah, we
in
won't
between.
have to bumble at the end either. Oh crap, we got 2 minutes left.
man,
Wrap it up. Wrap it up.
We gotta make a point really quick, or it's not gonna work. Excuse me 1 second while I grip it and rip it. Cranberry lime. This 15 extra minutes just makes me so much more relaxed.
Yes.
I feel so much better. So, as you can see, today we are talking about explosions in children, also known as industrialization.
And maybe children will explode depending on what industry they're in.
You know, wait, hold on. Is it too soon? No. 1750 to 1850, then 1850 to like 1920.
Yeah.
We're good.
Yeah,
we're 100 years
100
back.
years away from.
We're okay. We can make fun of child labor now. That's awful.
That's not bad.
I feel really bad. So child labor being one of those situations that comes from industrialization. So let's do you want to do the textbook term?
Yeah, let's just start. Let's just start with it.
Let's start with the textbook.
And we can bounce around a little bit. Yeah, let's talk about child labor because that is always the thing that kind of always gets to the students and to any historian that looks at it. And
really
you look at it through your modern lens and not through maybe the lens of the time period.
Take 2 minutes and talk about modern lenses. Let's talk about lenses of history real quick. That's important. The problem that we see today is when you study history, we tend to overlay our values and morals. Yeah. Our morals and values. I can speak this language. They pay me to do this.
Yeah.
Our values and morals on the time period we're studying, and you can't do that.
It's harder to do. You come across, and it kind of dates your thinking at times when you do that. And you see it throughout history with different historians anyways, always putting in their time period that they're living and applying that to what's going on in the past. But if you want to be a little more successful in your thinking, you can still have those thoughts and still express those thoughts when you're writing an opinion piece and things like that. But when you're looking back just at the history, the ability to understand what was happening and what was going through people's minds, and then things that brought about those changes, right? That's the other thing, right?
Yeah.
We look back and go, hey, this was a bad idea. But at the time, we're looking at things and people are doing what they need to do to make a living in some cases. We don't know the true stories of why these children are in labor, not in labor, but laboring all the time.
Yeah, well, they're working in jobs and stuff like that. And one of the things we got to understand is our society has two concepts that are completely foreign to the people of the 1750s to the 1850s. And the first thing is childhood. Having a real childhood like we conceive of it, like where you have education and you're allowed to play and your only real job is to learn and to have fun and to have this freedom moment, that is a completely modern concept. Because back then, 1850 was about the time they start saying, ooh, maybe we should educate kids. That's 1853. That's Horace Mann and all them. And it's like, it's this idea of our children should be educated and shouldn't have to just work. Back then, you were working from the time you could hold a tool.
And then you get the concept of free education, free public education.
That's insane, yeah.
Right? This idea of, okay, well, who before that were we going to educate? And now why do we want the children out of the factories and into an educational setting? Well, what's going to be the benefit to society? And does the societal benefit outweigh the family benefit that these children are getting by making a wage?
Which is a question we keep asking ourselves now, but it's no longer the same thing. We don't worry about a society of the societal benefit versus the family benefit. Now I think what we have is the concept of the individual benefit.
Yeah.
And the individual benefit is coming to the fore. So the point of view, the lens we're looking for isn't really a modern lens, it's an individual lens.
Yes.
And when you look at an individual lens, I mean, there's some parts of that are very kind of self-serving, but there are parts of that are society serving. Like Each of those kids, like you see the kids in the picture, each one of those kids has a life and has thoughts and has potential. But in the industrial world, their potential was labor output. And in our modern world, the potential is whatever they can conceive of. They could be they could be the world's next best podcasters or the best they could cure. But we always do that thing like, what if this kid could have cured
Yeah.
cancer? And the answer is true, but statistically speaking, more or less just going to be another person earning and producing.
So
So
why not start them out early?
so why not start them out early? And the idea that education is for all, that's a big deal. So our modern world is absolutely shaped by industrialization.
Oh, yes.
Industrialization, a textbook term, is the movement from handmade goods to machine manufactured goods, which is going to change everything. Looking around at the desk right now, I have more than 4 pencils on my desk, and that's due to industrialization. The concept that will lead to an idea that will especially take root just before World War One, which is mass
Yeah.
production. And so, what's mass production, Schnetty?
Mass production is where you can make large quantities of goods at a brisk pace and make them cheaply. And what I mean by cheaply means at cost, for cost, right? You're making so many of them. They're not, the product itself is not cheap, but the process is cheap enough where it then becomes affordable for everybody else. And then becomes affordable for the outside world.
So, if you're an industrialist, if you're starting industrialization, if you're trying to come up with a concept of an industrial world where machine made goods are working, people are doing factory jobs, what does success look like to an industrial age entrepreneur, the person that's going to take all the risk and build this stuff? What does success look like?
Building up that business, going from the handmade where it might be you doing all the work to being hired of people to do all the work, and then maybe if you keep advancing on automation where the machines start doing the work for you, you need maybe less and less people on your payroll,
Mm-hmm.
but in the outcome you as the industrialist reap the economic benefits for it.
So that's kind of the idea. We even have like glimmers of this way back in the 1750s and 1850s. The concept of like Charles Babbage and his adding machines and stuff like that. The idea that at some point we want the machines to do more and more of the work. And as you look at industrialization, they start out as very simple machines, but become more and more complex. But I'm probably getting ahead of myself. I usually tend to do that.
It's all right.
So let's start. Where does industrialization start?
The first industrial movement that we talk about in history is early 1800s in Britain with the textile industries. Right? You get this where you movement of, let's say, farm girls to industrial sites where they're going to get a little bit of an education. There's going to be a little bit of a schooling. They might even have a dorm for it, but they're going to be working in the textile industries. They're going to be working in that style industry. It's going to actually carry over to Lowell, Massachusetts. They're going to borrow the English system and set it up here in Lowell, Mass, with a little more emphasis on education, by the way, in the United States, and we just saw in Great Britain.
Because we have a lot more space and we're more of stop me if I'm wrong, but I feel it's also because of the more religious bent of the United States hitting that second great awakening about the same time as the market revolution.
Yes, you saw, that, and well, in Massachusetts, always had that law in place where you had to educate anybody if a town was over 50 people. You had to provide an education. So wow. Massachusetts educational law, I don't know it off the top of my head, but they have that law in place. So here's a way of kind of honoring that law, but still getting our work done that we need to get done, so to speak.
So what's going on is, sorry, I just completely lost my train of thought. So we've got that. The Lowell Mill girls are going to be especially there too, because it's going to be, the promise is going to be education and skills and get you some money so that you can you can get ahead. But that's also going to be an idea that's kind of exploitative as well.
Oh yeah, everything. I mean,
Yeah.
everything in this time period or any time period really does when it has a benefit to it. You're always going to have those people that's going to take it to the next step, whether it's good or bad. It's going to go to the next step there. But we take off with textiles, and then we can start branching out a little from there because at the same time the textile industry is really taking off. Railroads are starting being introduced in Western Europe and the United States. So we're talking 1820s, 1830s, and people are figuring out how to make money that way with this idea of steel, right? The steam engines have come out, and we're going to kind of push these things along the railroad industries. The problem is the steel's not as good as it can be, just the way the process of it being made is at the time in the 1820s, 1830s. But there is a small industry push in there pre American Civil War, if you will.
Yeah. And so what happens is steel is going to start to shape the country. It's going to give us that ability to make stronger, sturdier stuff. Steel is going to be really one of the big deciding factors. Steel is going to be one of the things that we are going to be using as our main resource all the way through the First and Second World Wars. America's ability to create steel is going to be major. Um, and how do we get that? The great way we come about making steel better shows you American ingenuity, I
Well,
think.
the thing is, the working on it in the United States was also a couple people in England working on how to improve the steel. This is where Bessemer's in England. The whole Bessemer process you see there
Uh-huh.
on the picture on the left, this open hearth process, right? We're going to continually keep the steel hot. We're going to blow hot air over it when we pour it into its forms and do a lot of stuff so it doesn't get air bubbles and letting the thing spit and spark and all we want to, right? Making it obviously more dangerous,
Yeah.
but making the steel stronger and cost wise cheaper. So it's being done on both continents.
Was it a joint effort?
No, they were working on it kind of at the same time,
Okay.
and it kind of just came across and happened at the same time. And this, give or take, a few years here or there, we're generalizing, of course, but it's not this. We know what's happening, kind of, but they're not working together on it. But it comes out to being kind of the same idea and the same way of doing it. And then when the steel industry takes off, everything else can take off after that.
Absolutely. And that's another one of those lenses on history. Today we're so interconnected, we assume that everyone knows that everyone's working on this. And this is not the case here. They're both working to make it better, but the Bessemer process is its own thing and it's across the pond.
Yes.
So when the steel gets better, you're going to actually see ancillary industries coming in. When I say ancillary industries, I mean like shipping.
Oh yeah.
Shipping that's going to use the steel to go on railroads, steamboats, steamships,
Steamships. Yeah.
all of this different stuff that are going to capitalize on the progression that they're going to make on the steam engine and the steel process to make an ancillary kind of secondary industry called shipping, which is going to be a major thing as well. So now that you've got these products, you've got to ship it. And that's kind of where we get in United States history too.
And that's when we start opening up trade, right? We start trading big scale trade, not just what we've been trading with Britain for a while, and Britain's been trading in the Americas for a while. This is large scale. We start looking for other places as well because now we can go all over the place, and it doesn't take as long as with the old wooden ships and the old sailing
There you
ships.
go.
And we have all of this industry that's coming into play, and you combine it with the age of invention, right? So all of
Yeah.
these were improving. Everything's getting improved. It seems like sometimes new stuff's coming out every other day, if not every other month, right? And you get this big improvement, and you start looking around going, man, I can improve this, I can improve that. In the United States, the U.S. Patent Office just explodes in the second half of the 19th century.
Then we get the idea of also intellectual property as well. See, this is the thing. Industrialization isn't just industrialization. That is the bedrock of it. Industrialization has political ramifications, it has sociological ramifications, and it has territorial ones as well. If we're going to be able to start moving this anywhere, like you said, we're going to start moving into bringing these goods now to foreign markets where we're usually just getting the resources from. Now we can take it back just as easily. So, how does steel shape the rest of the world?
I want to take it back really quick
Oh,
to
I'm
when we
sorry. Go
talk
ahead.
about intellectual property,
Yeah.
because in Europe, they have these laws where if you're making champagne, it has to come from Champagne. It has to come from the Champagne region of France, right?
Hmm.
If you're making this particular type of glass, it has to come from Venice to be called this, right? They have all of those rules. That's kind of where we get this idea of patents, right? This is the design. This is what it needs to be. So that taking hold in the United States and actually having a patent office where it kind of exposes you can protect your intellectual property. Now, on the side note of that, the intellectual property stuff is if you worked for somebody and if it was your idea, they still got the credit for it. So
So
you've kind of given up your intellectual property right to work for Thomas Edison, to
I
work
was about to
for
say.
Henry Ford, to work for um, Alexander Graham Bell, somebody like that, right
So
here in the United
that's
States.
let's talk. That's the charred elephant in the room, isn't it? We always talk about like the unsung heroes. Once again, that's a lens on history. The unsung heroes like Nikola Tesla, who is now overly sung and crazy, by the way. That's a whole podcast in and of itself. But we talk about this use of immigrant labor, this use of other people's ideas going through the person who hired you. And we get really kind of, I guess, like offended by that our individualistic achievements are being taken by General Electric or whatever company we're working for. But to them, that's perfectly natural. You have signed on for a company. You are working for that company. It's the group versus the individual prospect again that we have the problem with our lens, our 21st wave century way of thinking. Nikola Tesla should have gotten his credit, and the answer is no. He signed that away when he started to work for Edison. In exchange for the ability to do these things, he's going to have to do this. So, yeah, that's the charred elephant in the room.
Yeah.
Um, he's writing something on the board.
Coach Smith has just walked in and is making notes on the board for us to.
It's like the Renaissance artists.
Oh, well, come and say it to the nice speaker.
Hi, everybody. What they're talking about, it reminded me of what Renaissance artists used to do. Those famous people like Michelangelo or Da Vinci, they would have people draw up part of their artwork, and then Da Vinci or Michelangelo would come in and they'd actually kind of put the finishing touches on it, and then they'd claim it as their own. Same idea, is it not?
Something
It's right on there. Coach Smith comes in, hits a solid double. Look at that.
It's a very nice one. Thank goodness we're talking about industrialization.
Giving examples from the past.
You know what? He's making connections through history,
That's
which is what we're supposed to
history.
do, right? This is kind of the same idea, intellectual property, right?
And now he's eating a salad.
No, yes, so
so-
healthy.
I had a chimichanga. So, industrialization is so.
Let's go back to what you said, the impact of steel.
Okay, let's talk about
The impact of steel, really quick, not only around the world, but you also have, remember that there is a couple of European nations that grow up during the Second Industrial Revolution. Italy, okay, not as much, but Germany. Germany unifies and grows up in the Second Industrial Revolution.
Yeah.
That's hitting Europe and the United States roughly around the same time, and the German unification, the German nation grows up in this, and quickly explodes in the industrialization world. Just factory upon factory, getting its GDP up, getting its workforce going. Building things, yes, they are building war materials, right? This is Otto von Bismarck and Blood and Iron, right? The old Blood and Iron, right? That push there, and that's gonna create this nation that's kind of known now. The joke is German efficiency.
Yeah.
Look how quickly they came from being a baby nation to being a major power on the world stage because of industrialization, right? How do they do it? The efficient, boom, 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 boom. You have middle managers, right? That idea of a middle manager and a supervisor, making sure people are doing what they're supposed to be doing, right? Then it comes out of that German efficiency growing uphill, and that doesn't happen without the steel industry I don't think without leading the way. Right, and you don't get a lot of this. You don't get a machine like what the two young boys are standing on there without this, the steel industry kicking in, and this better, stronger, but yet cheaper price steel to push everything, not only whichever side of the Western world you're on, whether you're in Western Europe or you're in the United States, that steel kind of, in my opinion, pushes and leads the way. Just as out front going, okay, everybody, let's go. Everything can build from that. Because if you take it in the 21st century and Henry Ford's mass production of automobiles, you talked about ancillary industries that come
Yeah.
out of that rubber industry, and we can talk about the evils of the rubber empires in South America and Africa.
Oh, we're gonna do
But
that next. That's the next one.
the glass, uh, the glass industry that comes out of that as well, and all those different little factory jobs that, not little, but those factory jobs that pop up where you're doing the same thing 8 hours a day. You're putting on the rear passenger wheel, right? That's your job.
That's all you do.
And it's all you do, right? That efficient work that comes out of that, right? Kind of borrowing from each other as the world starts to get just a little bit smaller, globalizing at the time. But you can kind of understand what's happening and being played off each other in those forms and manners.
Which is also why it becomes so much about automation at the end. When it gets closer and closer to our century, it's more about automation. Yes, we have one person putting on the left rear tire, but what if I made a machine that could put on the left rear tire as well?
Or a machine that can put on all four tires at the same time.
Oh, I'm gonna get that excited. That's
Well, and that's
stuff.
the fear coming out of World War II with an industrialization. The fear of automation replacing workers, especially workers that had just spent 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years fighting a war. Are they going to come home and instead of being replaced by, let's say, the women that were working in the factories, even though the businessman could pay them less, are they going to be replaced by machines? Because that's the next step kind of in that process of, can we fully automate?
Which leads to the crisis we're kind of facing right now. If we are being replaced by machines, what do we do with those factory jobs? What do we do with the people who are really good at creating things and stuff like that and building these machines that were really helpful? I mean, for a while there was that sweet spot between 1920 and 1940, this kind of peak efficiency of the machines and the peak efficiency of human beings, which gave America especially the wherewithal and the resources and the industrial strength to make literally almost, it seemed like in a couple of months, a fighting force more formidable than anything had ever been seen before. We went from not nothing, of course. We had a decent navy and a decent army, but now we were on a caliber that was unfathomable, and we're supplying every other nation that's working with us. So we hit that sweet spot between 1920 and 1940, and like you said, the fear of automation is now. So what is the new industrialization? If we've got machines making machines, which is perverse. If you've ever seen Star Wars, that joke landed. If you haven't, then I just said the word perverse, and that's going to get us dinged. But anyway, uh, uh, what is our new industrialization now? What's the newest industrialization?
That's a good question. I don't know. I'd have to think on that for a second.
Like, no, there's no thought. It's a hot take.
It's a hot take.
It's the hottest of hot takes. It's the charred elephant hot take. So
it's actually a really good thought question, because what's the next big industry where we need human hands to make it?
I don't know of any of that besides surgery and like the fiddling about with human bits. But even then, we're trying to make that robotic.
Yeah.
So what is the industry that needs human hands to guide it? I can't think of anything automated. I can't think of anything product wise. That's the thing.
It always goes back to product, right? What are we going to buy? What are we going to use?
Well, here's the thing. Most of our let's look at the NFT market, which was it's a dumb business, and I'm glad it's dying. But the NFT market was not about human hands. It was AI just making images and selling them to people. It's the whole video game market. We're not making video games much anymore. You download it. You're paying $50, $60 for ones and zeros that can be taken away at any point. There's no real product. The products
So
we're making.
is the game designers?
They're
Then what's
again,
the role
well,
there?
we're treating them like factory workers. That's the thing. We're
Yeah.
still putting the crunch in, but instead of this kind of physical labor, this intense moment where you have a product at the end, you have this ephemeral kind of constantly moving product in the game world. It's like we've built a game, but it's only half really finished, and the rest of the game is going to come out slowly as we add more to it. And you're going to pay more for it as well, bit by bit, second by second.
Came to me. The one industry that still needs human hands, clothing, textiles.
You kidding me? It goes all the way back to textiles.
Goes all the way back to textiles. Look, we're all still fully dressed. We all want to pay $500 for the new pair of Jordans when they come out, right? There's human hands making those. Cheap human hands is the way they're being paid by these major companies in South Asia, Southeast Asia, right? They're not being in the working conditions in most of those places are horrendous, and the pay is horrendous. But you're back to textiles, I think, because everything we're wearing is somehow still connected to human hands.
So like we still make the fabric by machine, just like we did back in the 1750s to 1850s. We're making the cloth by hand, by machine, but by hand we're making the individual shirts and stuff like that.
Because I think they figured out it's cheaper to do it in other parts of the world where they can get away with practicing. I'm gonna borrow an American history term here. Some Gilded Age hiring practices and employment practices that they can't get away with in the United States, in Western Europe anymore. And it's cheaper to still do that than to, let's say, come up with a machine that can, glue our shoes together.
Because it
Right
could
in the
be,
long
yeah,
run.
you need that
Yeah.
human touch.
Yeah.
So then let's look at the sociological aspects of it. Because this sounds like we're hitting that anywhere. We're talking about the horrendous conditions and the child labor stuff, but they're no different than the original conditions in America and Britain in the factories. We've just sort of pushed them out further to the places that are less developed than we are.
Yeah, less developed and not under the watchful eye of a press.
Yeah.
Whether it's the big five news companies here in the United States, or the BBC in Britain, or Der Spiegel in Germany, or something like that.
France has one, right?
Yeah, supposedly.
I don't know. I've heard nice things. So we're looking at that, and so the sociological aspect is, after a point, the conditions are bad. And that's what you need the press for. That's what happens to America. The Gilded Age is broken by all of these muckrakers, these people that are going. Ida Tarbell, Upton Sinclair, that one guy.
Yeah.
But the idea is that they're going in, they're saying, this is what's happening. It is not good. And then what happens is we try to fix the problem. But in a way, we kind of need that horrendous conditions to get the cheapness that we want. So we push it out to places that can't fight it as easily.
And we don't see it. We don't recognize it's not happening down the street from us anymore.
Oh yeah, out of
Right.
sight, out of mind.
Yeah, right. The jungle is the meatpacking industry in Chicago, and it's right there, right?
Yeah.
It's out of sight, out of mind. We justify it because, well, it doesn't really affect us. We can't see it. And yeah, every once in a while you'll get a news agency that goes out there, or you get a show like Vice News that does stuff like that. But I still want my product.
That's the yeah. Do you remember the Foxconn documentary that they did a while ago, where there were workers at the Foxconn factory in China, taken from the rural areas, and moved to this industrial place, given a job that's very much the same thing, a very simplified, non-machine job. You solder this piece on, you put this chip in, you put this conduit in. But the thing is, they're so intensely worked that they're actually harming themselves to try to get out of it, to try to get out of the contract. And so what we've got is now, instead of buying, back then buying was just like, it's the greatest thing because now I can buy two shirts in my closet instead of just the one that I had made. But
Yeah.
the question becomes more of a moral one. Can we morally accept the damage it's doing for a cheaper product?
At this time, right?
At this time, this is
as long
the
as
21st
we don't
This is
take that
21st.
and try to apply, what's going
Yeah.
back there. Make sure we understand that difference, right? This is what's
Yeah.
happening. Let's learn from this
Mhm.
and try to make our situation a little bit better, a little bit safer, a little bit.
And that's where the ambiguity comes in. Because in the 1850s to 1920s, the answer was unabashedly yes, my cheap product is worth the kid on the left. And it's like, we're fine with that. We've accepted that there's something kind of like
Well,
clear
there's
about
also a
that.
social thing about when we
Yeah,
started, when in the West started switching and putting a more of a value on children
labor
other
and
than labor and other than, and that's we look at it a little bit more in European history on the way of parenting has shifted in Europe from the thoughts of children. Economically in the United States, you're not looking at the major, Christmas holiday, Halloween, and Easter holidays really becoming this big marketing thing until almost post World War II,
mhm.
where children seem to now kind of have matter economically in a buying sense
Yeah, they have buying power.
instead of a working power. So again, this whole idea that oh, look, it's the poor children there. Children were thought of differently. It just
Yeah.
it's just the truth is they don't think of children as we would think of children nowadays.
And that's a hard thing to wrap your mind around when you're studying industrialization is you think to yourself, why would you put children into the textile mills like that? Why would you make them go into the mines until they're 12 years old and come out hunched over and stuff like that? And the answer is because the job needed to be done.
Need to be done, and they can do things that adults can't do.
Yep.
They're small enough. Their hands are small enough. Their bodies are skinny enough that they can get into places
Well,
that adults couldn't get to. And if a machine got jammed, if one of those textile machines got jammed, right, can they get their little hand in there and unjam it without having to shut down the entire line?
so, which also that kind of brings up to where we are today in this 21st century mindset. I think the two generations before us still had enough child labor or young person labor to go, you don't have to stay in school. You can go work. It's not brilliant or fun, but you can get a good paycheck and you keep a family alive. But now education is so pushed forward, like we can't
Well,
not have
well, look at all the trade jobs: plumbers,
yeah.
welders, auto mechanics. Look at the money those people can make,
Still
right?
wonderful work.
Those men and women that do those jobs, right? Essential jobs.
We don't push that
We don't
anymore.
push that anymore because we've taken this approach from industrialization. We got to now push education because we got to put them somewhere. If they're not coming to work with mom and dad in the factories, where do we put them? But we can also kind of use this for assimilation now because this is the era of immigration, right? So
Yes.
if we take the kids out of school, if we take the immigrant children out of school, and again, whether we're in New York or whether we're in London or whether we're in Paris, we take the immigrant kids out of the workforce, put them in a school, we can start assimilating these new groups of immigrants in because it's always easier to assimilate the younger ones than the older ones.
And that's going to be after the Civil War. That's going to be after World War One, where these new groups are going to come in. And the further away from America they're going to be, the more assimilations that's required. And so the more intensive the assimilation is going to be
Yeah.
in school. School is a giant assimilation system. We teach you the subjects we want to teach you. We give you some limited choice, but once again, it's a tool.
And it starts here. You took it all the way back to Horace Mann in the 1820s, right?
Yeah.
So you have the Horace Mann and the Guffey readers and all that stuff where it was, here's the English pages, here's this math pages, here's that other stuff. Same concept here. We're just moving it forward, and we're getting the kids now out of a dangerous situation, which is a good progressive-minded thing to do,
It is a new,
especially at the turn of the century.
it is a progressive concept of these kids need to be protected. And I think it's also come with the fact that beforehand we had a much higher infant mortality rate, so it was kind of a disattachment in some ways.
Well, that could be attached to the fact that we're all still an agricultural society, though,
Also true.
because
Every hand is
you do need more workforce on the farms. And best way to get a workforce is have more children.
more work for bigger workforce, keep the children working, and then we get to the 1940s where we got more automation, and it's 2.5 kids in the suburbs, now let them have a childhood. This is what you should be doing, assimilating and growing into our culture. And then we come up to now where I think we're going through another immigrant concept where we're trying to assimilate again. But how do you think that? Well, I mean, like,
Well, you have the industrialization, let's say in the 50s, right? Dad's working in an assembly line, or dad's working for General Motors, or dad's working, down on the docks if you're on the East Coast, or if you're in Liverpool, in London. But there's really a good chance that you're going to do kind of that same idea and that same concept,
yeah,
right? So yes, you're going to get that compulsory education through
eighth grade.
eighth grade, age 14, right? And then what's your next step? What's your next move, right? And if it's job or high school, right? So you kind of get that play there. We do start seeing the shift in the late 60s into the 70s.
So let's talk about women in this. How does industrialization, like at the beginning, women were the target.
Yes, we get the young farm girls.
The young farm girls, the girls that were already doing the textile work.
Yeah, anyways,
in the homes. Right. The domestic industry.
You get the shift from that and still working in the textile industry. You get the disaster of the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire in New York as an example. But you also then start getting this idea of what becomes quote unquote traditional women's work, right? Women weren't secretaries in the business world for a really long time.
Mm-hmm.
That was a man's job to be a businessman secretary. That was a male's job. But being a teacher, being a nurse, especially after the American Civil War, the Spanish-American War, and World War I, right?
The Red Cross.
And with the Red Cross comes into play, right? That this idea that we have these kind of traditional women's jobs coming into play here. But then it kind of got flipped on its head because in both World War I and World War II, the women of the United States, the women of Great Britain were asked to go work in the factories.
Yeah.
Right? Propaganda posters everywhere, and men, can they do that work really well? Right? Really. I mean, they're building all of, when the war is on, they're building all of the war machines.
I mean, I think one of my first crushes was Rosie the River.
Yeah. So you have that interplay, but they're expected after the war's over to go back into that domestic lifestyle.
Yeah.
Right. Give up the factory job, give it back to the soldiers, right, as they return type idea.
So the question I have for you there is that a return to the norm, or is that a different thing? Is that kind of a new twist?
I'd say it's a little bit of a twist, but you still had those traditional, again, women's jobs, teaching, nursing, and then secretarial work turns into a women's job from the wars because they become the wax and the waves, right? They become that auxiliary corps, right? That helps out drivers, right? For generals and things like that, because apparently generals can't drive their own cars during the war. So,
well, how awkward would that be? Where's Patton? Oh, he got lost.
Yeah. Right.
He probably stopped at a 7-Eleven.
Yeah. So you still have that line there, but getting out of the factory work, right? And upscale large factories, not textiles anymore. Those types of things. I know during World War II, my grandpa's job was taken over by my grandma. He worked for General Motors.
There you go.
So what he did when he went off to war, she went and did his job.
There you go.
So, but when he got back, she went back home. He went back to that job for a while and then took advantage of the GI Bill later on.
I was about to say, to what extent does the GI Bill change that concept of going back to those factory jobs? Because both my grandpas came back from the war, and Grandpa Eddie started a grocery, which failed, and then a printing business, which didn't fail. And then my Grandpa Scherzer, my Grandpa Eugene, he went to Center Texas, deep rural Center Texas. Center Texas. And he opened up an auto parts store. So no longer working in these factories, now he is retail.
My grandpa took his GI Bill money and opened up a hardware store / bar.
That's brilliant.
Small town.
Small
town Midwest. Yes.
That is 21st century thinking in 1950, 1960. That's brilliant.
It's a hardware right next to the house.
Well, I mean, we got those hybrids now, the tune-up. You get a beer and a cut. You don't want the barber drinking too.
Yeah.
These are Because what you need to do is get a beer and then get a sledgehammer.
Yeah.
That is good thinking.
Dynamite.
Dynamite. Oh, literally
Yeah,
dynamite.
back in those days, you could buy dynamite at
Just-
the hardware store, right?
So that's we're kind of going through these waves. Industrialization kind of happens these circular motions. It seems that we're moving these progressive things forward. We kind of regress a little bit and then change the idea. Regress a little bit.
Well,
and
look
change the
look
idea.
at Elon Musk opening up the big facilities just outside of Austin.
Okay.
Right? You have just in the news last week a Chinese green energy company is buying up land in parts of Michigan to open up a factory there. Right, talking about it's
Yeah.
going to hire a couple hundred people and all that other stuff. Right, is that the new wave of industrialization coming in?
And that's the thing. You said a couple hundred people, and it was unless you were.
Well, it's a town that only has 100 people that's living in it.
Well, no, but that's the thing, though. Instead, like in the old days, when the new factories would open up, it's thousands of
Yes.
jobs. When Detroit and the before the Rust Belt was called the Steel Belt.
The steel is well, it's just you just had Detroit being one of the major cities in the United States.
These car manufacturers, though, coming in, and they would bring in thousands of jobs.
Well, there was at one point where all the cars for General Motors were made in the state of Michigan.
Okay.
They weren't
Yeah.
they weren't in Texas. They weren't in Tennessee. They weren't in Canada. They weren't in Mexico. They were all made in Michigan. If you drove a Buick, it came out of a town called Flint, Michigan.
Which is where the guys who made Evil Dead came from.
So
There's your fun fact of the day. So what we're looking at is, and tell me where, like, I'm gonna give this to you at the end just to tell me how I'm wrong. So what I'm seeing is this change and this kind of, it's everything old is new, everything new is old, and then what happens is at the end we're kind of getting more diminishing returns from this kind of business cycle.
no, you
What do
said it.
think? To what extent?
You said it right, because when we open up a factory, we're talking about hiring thousands of people. Now we talk about open a factory, we're talking about a couple hundred people, right?
Yeah.
So that number gets smaller because of automation,
Mm-hmm.
right? You have, BMW and Mercedes being made in South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, in the American South, right? And you got a few hundred people, maybe 1,000 people working there, but there's a lot of automation in those plants as well. So yeah, you're getting that lesser return with the opening up of a new factory and hiring people, right? And that brings in a whole new gamut of workers' rights and workers' safety and all that other stuff that kind of comes into play because the numbers are getting smaller, but the pay's getting better. The
Benefits
are getting way better, right? Because they don't maybe have to worry about as many people as they had to in the past. And that's another discussion for another day.
Yeah.
But you do have that kind of impact of industrialization starting out in a really small industry. We're talking, a couple of dozen farm girls coming and getting a little bit of an education, living in the dorms and doing all that stuff. And then really, really expanding and creating a nation like Germany and being a leading indicator into World War I, and then dominating World War II. And then after the 1950s, you start seeing sliding off a little bit and the numbers start getting a little bit smaller. Like you said, diminishing returns from the public perspective of a job.
So then the question becomes, once the robots are doing all the manual labor, what's besides trades, which we found out are still 100% human needed for now,
Yeah.
plumber, carpenter, some
Yeah.
of that. What are the kids of today, the kids listening to this podcast, what are we going to focus on for them? What's their hope?
That's a good question. What is their hope? Because
So I get,
what are they going to do? I mean,
where do they go from here? And I guess it doesn't really matter what the answer is, because the first part of the answer is always going to be education.
yeah,
Once you've got your free education, the world is the mollusk of your choice.
yeah. What are you going to do with it, right?
Yeah.
Those kids in the picture don't have much of a choice. If they survive that factory, they're probably going to work in a factory their entire life.
Yeah. Oh, that
It's almost perfect timing.
almost worked out just beautifully. So yeah, that's industrialization and the questions that still remains. We haven't answered this question yet. We're
Yeah.
still working on this question. It's a developing part of our human history. Is now what?
Yeah, because this is still an ongoing process.
Yep.
And we can kickstart it whenever we want to. It's still an ongoing process till to this day.
And that's the big picture of industrialization. So if you were asked a question about what is the big picture of industrialization, the understanding is it keeps revolving. We keep changing the rights of the workers. We push out to places where we can't, the press can't show the horrors of it. But the question now is, now what?
Now what?
Huh. Is it a down note or an up note?
Can it be both?
Can't it be both? All right. Thank y'all for listening. We'll catch you next time.